Good morning and welcome to another Pure Theory Crafting for Marvel Avengers Alliance 2. Today, that's definitely going to be a misnomer, especially for the first part. This is a character that I have used extensively. She's been part of my lineup for quite a while. Age of Ultron Black Widow is my current leader. You can see her there on the screen. I do so because she can kind of universally benefit allies. Age of Ultron Black Widow is a tactician, and she is, like most of them, a support tactician. This is significantly different from her Marvel Now counterpart that is so popular, where the Marvel Now Black Widow is a high damage infiltrator. Her Age of Ultron variant is really there to increase the team's offensive capabilities, specifically offense, but doesn't necessarily have that high raw damage in her own right. We'll see that she has a couple of strong moves, but her own attack stat is fairly low, and so she can't take advantage of them to the same way that a dedicated damage dealer can, even just like her counterpart. Instead, her greatest strength lies in the general nature of her offensive buffs. Namely, she can apply them to practically any team that she's on. Most infiltrators are specialized. They have very specific teams that they work with. She doesn't necessarily have that, and that she can be applied to any team and find a spot, but other tacticians are going to be better in specific roles than she's going to be. She's a great all-around tactician and a great fallback tactician if your team is a little bit of a hodgepodge and isn't fully focused on one setup. This actually made her a good early tactician for me, and she's kind of maintained her place in my party, in my roster, in my lineup, because of the tendency I have to cycle characters out for these videos. Because I'm consistently leveling up and kind of having an oh shiny moment, so that I'm looking over at new heroes when I leveled up Falcon, when I leveled up Nebula, when I tried out Electro. Swapping them around is the reason that she is all the way up 4-star and is right there at the very top of my list. Now, I've taken off all of her ISO slots for this. I did have somebody who kind of commented that they wish I'd stop calling them E-ISOs. That's a bit of a throwback to the first Avengers Alliance game, where you had E-ISOs and A-ISOs and U-ISOs and everything else. Um, I still call them E-ISOs for either equipable or enhanced ISO, take your pick, because there are still unstable ISOs, and I would not be surprised if down the line we see something like the A ISOs, the attribute or whatever they were called, the augmented ISOs, reappear as a way to individualize certain characters instead of constantly using the same sets for everybody. Yeah, we can individualize them through their abilities because they all have 8, and that is a wonderful trait. I like that for this game. But I wouldn't be surprised if down the line, in order to keep interest and add some complexity, we begin to see multiple ISO types. Looking at her stats, her health and defense, they start lower than several of her other stats. They will build up some. She has the color slots that match these. Her final values for her defenses are actually not bad. She's a little tougher than you would expect in the long run. Now, her evasion starts pretty high, and it'll stay pretty high. She gets a couple of purple slots for this. But her attack, which starts as one of her 3 lowest stats, she doesn't get any for. This will stay pretty low, and we'll see that while her speed starts as maybe, it's tied for evasion as her second highest, she also doesn't get any slots for speed, and that's where we're going to want to put our focus, because her primary role in the party is the buffs and debuffs she applies, not necessarily the individual damage she does. And because she benefits from those buffs as well, her final damage value is a little higher than it'll look like at first, but still not on par with the damage dealers in your group. Her leader's bonus, Dexterity. This is one of my favorites, actually. Accuracy is an all-important stat. Accuracy and evasion, if either one of those is on a leader's bonus, that's a wonderful thing. Speed is one of the better all-around stats. Your tanks getting them their moves faster, more damage output from your damage dealers. It's a stat that strongly benefits both roles without necessarily compromising the other side. Accuracy is great for damage dealing, but doesn't necessarily help you survive. Evasion is great for survival, but doesn't help you deal damage. Speed helps both. So this is a very strong leader's bonus overall, in my opinion, but again is maybe tilted a little more towards offense than it is for defense, because that kind of sums up Age of Ultron Black Widow. Her passive, Spycraft, tied into her resources because she is an insight user. And all insight users tie insight to their passive. Insight is gained whenever an enemy acts. This word right here, yes, attacks generate additional insight. So attack actions give you more. But it occurs whenever an enemy takes any action, including free attacks, including buff and debuff moves. If you tag a Hydra agent and he drops to half health and does his Hail Hydra move, you gain insight. And given how frequently everybody farms Spec Ops 1-3, it's not been uncommon for her to shoot a Hydra agent, trigger Hail Hydra, and get another turn so that she can shoot him and kill him. That happens on a somewhat regular basis. All Insight users have that passive that gives them a free turn when Insight fills to 100. It then gives a secondary effect, and for her, it refills her stamina gauge to full. Now, stamina starts at 100, regens at 40 per turn. We'll see that she only has 2 moves out of her 8 that can actually drop below that. Many of her moves are 60 or 70 stamina, and because she doesn't have combo point finishing moves like Gamora did, she can't weave them together indefinitely without dropping to 0 stamina unless she uses one of those 225 stamina filler moves. And even then, you're only basically gaining 15 back per turn, and it takes a long time to refill your stamina. She is dependent upon her insight, restoring her stamina to full. Unfortunately, half of this is misleading / bugged. Insight is definitely bugged right now. Actions on this turn cost no stamina? Yeah, that's not true. Your insight will become full, but it's going to cost you stamina to use whatever move it is. And so if you use a 70 stamina move on your insight turn, you're only going to have 70 on the next turn following it up. But it does allow you to consistently keep her stamina a little bit higher so that she doesn't have to always fall back onto her tactical in order to keep herself going in combat. The stronger the enemy line and the more attacks they get, the better this is going to work. All Insight users are at their best when fighting challenging content. Right now, I do have to resort to her tactical even in Spec Ops 1-3, because aside from the epic Yellow Jacket fight itself, enemies just don't take their turns fast enough against a 4-star character. In the second Spec Ops, she was amazing. On the portions where, the characters weren't necessarily restricted, the number of additional turns Insight users get against high damaging enemies is really good. Insight users in general were kind of amazing for that. Heimdall would fill his insight much faster, I would assume. I had the chance to try him as an ally once during that, and then the ally who had him swapped him out. So I did get the chance to try him, and I did get to see just how fast insight turns fill against an epic boss, even before I had Age of Ultron Black Widow. So I'm telling that story a little bit out of order. Heimdall, obviously you can't take an ally into a Spec Ops. I had the chance to use him first as one of the original Insight users before I had her, and he was what sold me on bringing her into the team. Insight users, very good against strong opponents. Definitely start to feel it when the opponents aren't fast enough. I do not use her during a scouting mission, because she's going to spend half of the scouting mission just recharging her stamina. Enough on that, moving into the abilities. Her abilities allow her to slot into a large variety of teams, but don't necessarily specialize in such a way that more than 1 or 2 of them helps any given team. We're going to see that right off the bat with Pistolette. This is a ranged projectile attack and does slightly more for projectile teams than it will for other ranged teams, but it allows her to slot into any ranged team because she brings that wonderful sharpshooting buff to the entire team. Her moves that apply a buff and a debuff, or specifically her moves that apply a team-wide buff, tend to follow a pattern. At 1 star, they apply the debuff to one enemy. At 2 stars, it's the buff to herself. At 3 stars, the buff applies to the team. And then at 4 stars, we see that targeted, the debuff will apply to all enemies. So debuff, then buff to the team, then debuff to the enemy line. It's a fast move. The damage is slightly subpar for a fast move, but it's going to benefit from targeted once that's on the enemy. 50 stamina is pretty good since this will let you use it multiple times if needed, even without your insight turn. Take note of the tactical debuff. She takes high advantage of tactical debuffs. Her only 2 truly damaging moves that she gets are increased if the enemy has a tactical debuff on them, and she's very good at applying those. She does have a mental debuff, she does have a physical debuff. They're not really her biggest focus. She has lots of tactical ones that she brings to the fight. This targeted is fantastic for projectile teams. It is. That 25% accuracy is massive, since it will let you hit high evasion characters that you might not hit normally, and that is an even bigger damage increase than the 25 damage increase it gives. And if it's increasing up to a crit or a devastate, and you gain that 25% damage, well, it's increased the damage to a crit or a devastate, and that's a damage bonus too. So if you're using a projectile team, which is still somewhat rare, but I do often run her alongside Falcon and Winter Soldier, who both have projectile attacks, this move is very, very strong, and is one of my favorite tag-specific debuffs. Sharpshooting, of course, wonderful just overall damage increase for any ranged team. Removed if damaged. Part of her use is the ability to rapidly reapply sharpshooting. Some powerful range characters like Electro and Age of Ultron Hawkeye can apply it to themselves, but it's either taking away from one of their offensive actions, or it's, in the case of Electro, it's on a cooldown. If he gets damaged and that shield breaks and he loses sharpshooting, it's going to be a few turns before he can put it back up, and he's wasted a turn in order to apply it in the first place. Bring her along in order to maintain a higher uptime on that powerful sharpshooting debuff. Her utility goes down if your team is capable of applying it. Marvel Now Hawkeye can apply it to the team on his own, and it's a good and because he's also applying team-wide focused, it's a good buff for him to have, and kind of lowers her general usefulness for that team. One of her 2 high damage abilities, Widow's Sting. This is kind of a move of choice for me because it also gives, at 3 star, strengthen to the team. It doesn't apply any debuffs. It doesn't give strengthen to the team until 3 star, just like your others. But Exploit Schemes makes this a higher damage move and a respectable damage move despite her own low attack. It is unarmed. It benefits from Clobbered. Her melee buff debuff combination does apply Clobbered specifically, so that this can gain, all said and done, because that move also applies Rampaging, this gets like 115% bonus damage against the target she hit with that setup move, but it's still gaining enough damage against a target hit with, okay, redundant statement here, against an enemy hit with targeted, because it's tactical, that this still becomes a respectable source of damage, but there's a very high stamina cost. 70 stamina moves can be used twice before you're back to 0. And then you got to recharge. Her insight is how she can use this on a regular basis, and this becomes a primary source of damage once it's equipped, as long as you can use it. Evac support. This is a very unusual ability, and it's a trait of the Age of Ultron heroes, the Age of Ultron variants, that they can swap out in combat while still taking some kind of an action. We'll see that with Age of Ultron Thor. He has something similar where he has an attack that then swaps him into the reserves. When that swap out effect is triggered, it cannot be cancelled. There is no X in the corner. It will swap the character out. You don't have a choice. This can be thrown onto any other ally. It is meant to be used to throw on a low health ally or an ally hit with the damage over time effect in order to kind of keep them alive by pulling in a fresh reserve. It is a small heal. It's not a minor heal, but it's just not a big one. And I think it does about 800 or so on average. Seems to be the average that I've seen. It's done below that, it's done above that, but 800 seems to be its average. 25 stamina, that kicks in at 2 stars. It's the only reason I had it at 2 stars. It does drop all the way to 0, and the cooldown does drop as well. This move is surprisingly useful in PvP. In PvP, you don't have a reserve line. You cannot actually swap out the character. What you'll see is the animation where they jump back and then immediately jump back in. And it does not cost them their place in the turn order. It doesn't apply or remove any buffs or debuffs from them. If they're protecting, they stay protecting. If they're stealth, they stay stealthed. Instead, it just becomes a heal that you can throw on an ally. It will cause her to re-trigger her innate that we'll see here in just a little bit. System Shock. This is one of the 2 filler moves that you would put in a third slot, and it fits that role because of the 25 stamina. 142 damage for a fast move is a little bit above the curve on that rubric that I use, but her own low attack means that this will not necessarily be a high damage move. And it definitely doesn't reach that point in the rubric until then because it's normal otherwise. It's not unarmed. Yeah, she's going to punch them. At least that's what it looks like. But it's not unarmed and it doesn't speed up. It does apply Hindered and Weakened with an 80% chance at 2 star. One is tactical. Here's that physical debuff. She doesn't really benefit physical debuff teams because the only way to do it is to bring this kind of like tertiary move. But the low stamina cost and the eventual high rate of speed allows you to use this as a filler while you're waiting for the chance to use something like Widow's Bite again. It is Shock. It is a completely different tag from the first 2 damage moves, and it benefits a different team. It does mean that she can kind of help out Electro. Between sharpshooting and the ability to set off Static Shock, she can assist him in damage, although others will do it better. Brutal Ballet. This is her other primary initial setup move. Where Pistolette was sharpshooting, this is rampaging. Follows that same pattern. One enemy, herself, all heroes, all enemies, as it stars up. So eventually it does put Clobbered on all targets. I don't have it to that point yet. I'll probably get it there because I use a lot of I use more unarmed characters than I use projectile characters right now. So Brutal Ballet is a better candidate for 4 star for me than Pistolette is. This move will benefit from Clobber, but it's already fast, so it's not a big deal. It's not a high damage move. Even it barely meets that minimum requirement to where it's okay damaged. Its biggest source is it's there for the buffs, it's there for the debuffs. Unlike Pistolette, it doesn't drop to 50. It only goes as low as 60, which means you can use it 3 times consecutively, or you can use it alongside a 50 and a 70 point move using each of those once before you're completely out of stamina. Jump Kick is bugged. As of the time of this video, this move is bugged. It only costs 50 stamina. It always costs 50 stamina. It does give all heroes repositioned at 3 stars. This is where she plays to that whole tactical buff and debuff thing. She can strip tactical debuffs off your guys as well. Off balance at 4 star does not apply to all enemies. That's the bug that I've seen reported and seems to be fairly well known. This move kind of peaks at 3 star. 4 star just takes it up a little bit in damage, and because it stays at normal speed, that's not great damage. Ideally, this would apply off balance to the team and would become her 3rd move to assist free attackers. But frankly, you're going to be better off taking one of the tacticians that really boost the free attack team, like Captain Marvel or like Star-Lord. Don't use this move for her for a free attack team unless you don't have either of those other 2. This does apply it to 1 target. It's not like she doesn't apply off balance at all, but she can only apply it to 1 target at a time. And that's really not what she is there for. Explosive Discs, this is the other filler move. Its own damage, very, very low. Starts at 40, it's 42 with 2-star when you first get it. It only goes up to 48. The trick here is that Blast tag. It can set off Volatile. It is an area attack that can set off Volatile on everyone, and it applies wide open. Another tactical debuff there. Hide boosts damage and accuracy, vastly increases the damage of the rest of your team, especially an area of effect, strong area of effect character like Hawkeye or Electro. Anybody who's going to throw down one area of attack after another can benefit from the fact that at 4-star, she can spam this move. Once she's got sharpshooting up on the team, and this is ranged, so this is going to be your filler choice for a sharpshooting team. Once she has that up, once she has sharpshooting up, and once she's used Widow's Bite for strengthened, she can use Explosive Disc turn after turn after turn until her insight triggers, or she builds up enough insight to use Widow's Bite again for the higher damage. This move is somewhat situational. Eskrima Expertise has one of the largest list of tags I've ever seen anywhere. Blunt, Shock, and Unarmed, it does benefit from all of them simultaneously. You're never going to get the speed very fast, even with Clobbered. It's just not going to work. The trick here is the exploit schemes and the opportunistic. So it is going to increase damage based on the tactical debuffs that she throws around all the time anyway. The design of this is to make this her highest raw damage move so that she can kill them and use it again. I believe the initial thought was that this would be a move used during her insight turn to kill an enemy, gain another bonus turn, and use the stamina again, and start this chain. If it worked like it was supposed to as written, then you would get your insight turn, your stamina would be full, this move would be free, and then if it killed, she could use it twice more before she was down to 0 stamina, potentially killing the entire enemy line. What actually happens is that her low attack means that she's not always going to kill with this. It's going to do respectable damage, but not necessarily terribly high damage. And Insight is bugged in two ways in terms of interacting with this move. One is that it's going to cost you 70 stamina right off the bat. It's not going to be free. But the other is that the free turn from Insight does not play well with free turns from Critical Path or Opportunistic. We saw this when I went back and I talked about the Agent 13, kind of the follow-up video for that. If this move is used to kill someone on the Insight turn, you will not benefit from Opportunistic. You won't get another turn. She'll simply go back to her next spot in line. A better use is probably to fire off something like Explosive Discs, so that when she does use this on her normal turn, she's back up to 100 stamina, the enemies have the tactical debuffs, and she can go ahead and take full advantage of the opportunistic by using this back-to-back twice to potentially kill two different enemies. I have it, I've tried it, I've used it, it's got some definite use in PvP. I don't know that I recommend it for PvE. Let your damage dealers be the damage dealers, and go ahead and bring her for the buffs she brings to the team. Her tactical, Reassess the Situation, is a really long name for a tactical. Very fast. Obviously, again, as a stamina user, the core meaning of this move is to regenerate her stamina if her insight has not triggered. Because her insight turn is not free, that happens more often than I would like. On higher, harder content, she won't need to use this as much. Against more difficult enemies who take their turns faster, insight refills on a regular basis. This is true in PvP, this is true on heroics. This move sees more use when you're farming easier content. Spec Ops 1-3 is really not designed with 4-star heroes in mind. It's not uncommon by the second or third wave I have to use this because I've been killing my way through them too fast. In heroic fights, that's not always the case. In fact, in heroic battles, this almost never actually has to be used. When it is used, It does apply hasten to the team. That is a pretty strong buff. That's actually that makes this a pretty good tactical overall, because when you do need to use it, it provides a good buff, and it's a good buff even if you don't necessarily need it. I often run her alongside Winter Soldier right now. If I know I'm going to have to reload, I tend to use her to give him hasten so that he spends less time reloading. That also works with characters with long recharge periods like Wasp, or any of the power users in general tend to have those long recharge tacticals. This kind of is a way to support them generally while she's building up the offense of the team. Now her innate, remember Budapest, which is such a movie reference, being as this is the Age of Ultron variant, that the majority of people who haven't actually seen that movie and are just playing the game, which is probably the minority of people, but let's be honest, Age of Ultron was maybe not the best Marvel movie. I liked it, but it was not up to the standards of some of the others. This move is very much a movie pitch and doesn't necessarily work as well as we would hope. Like all Age of Ultron characters, the innate causes them to trigger an effect at the start of combat and when they switch in, because they trigger the start of combat as switching in. Hers applies cornered and revealed, and then delays her turn. She is fast enough, and the delay on this seems smaller than some of the others, so that she doesn't always act last. In fact, she actually gets her first turn before Winter Soldier about half the time, because he is just a slow character to start with. Cornered is bugged. This move is not bugged. It applies cornered. It works exactly like it's intended. Cornered is bugged and does absolutely nothing about protect. If protect is up and you swap her in, or if the enemy tries to apply protection after she's put cornered on them, it's going to work. They're going to get their protection up. It doesn't remove protect. It doesn't prevent it from being reapplied. It doesn't work in any way, shape, or form other than to put a little icon on the enemy. Revealed, on the other hand, works perfectly fine. And you'll see this more often in PvP because that's the largest number of stealth enemies you'll see when swapping in. It will strip off Veiled right at the start of a fight. After the change to Marvel Now Black Widow, her counterpart, this actually will increase her stats, but is very good against people like Black Panther, who start Veiled and do those really nasty opening shadow strikes. It pulls stealth off of him and prevents him from getting back into it anytime soon. This does also work in PvE when you're fighting stealth-based enemies like Wraith, who, once he's in stealth, he's not coming out of it for several turns. Swapping her to the back line, putting her back to the front line, will cause her to re-trigger this and rip that stealth back off of them. That's really the biggest use of this move. It's really only for removing stealth right now because the cornered effect doesn't actually do anything. Now, let's move over to the ISOs. Okay, I call them E-ISOs. I call them that for either equipable or enhanced E-ISOs, take your pick. A throwback to Marvel Avengers Alliance 1. We do still have unstable ISOs in this in the form of the canisters. I'm expecting A-ISOs down the line or something to kind of customize further. 3, accuracy. And then a whole list of defensive ones. There is no speed and no attack anywhere in this little quilt that she's got. If you have to choose between attack and speed as a secondary stat, I will always choose speed for her because her biggest use is the team-wide buffs. Her attack, therefore, kind of suffers. While it starts at an acceptable level, even with good solid E-ISOs, because this is a mainstay character for me, and so she gets some of my best, her attack still doesn't quite break 3,000, where her speed will, because I view speed as the more important of the two for the role in the team that she has for me. Now, her accuracy starts at 2,200, and with 3, she gets a pretty solid accuracy. So moves such as when you're using Pestilette and you're trying to apply the targeted and get the bonus from the crits, she's going to stick her debuffs and land crits with some regularity. That's not usually a problem for her. Her defensive slots here and the fact that she gets so many makes her a little bit tougher than you might expect especially if you're looking at the Marvel Now Black Widow, who's all evasion and nothing else. She's not really built, that version of her is not really built to take a hit. She's built to dodge all of them. This character is pretty good about mitigating damage overall. She won't evade every attack. Instead, she'll drop a number of them to glances, and her defense and her health let her take a shot or two. She's not a damage dealer. I don't give her coordinated. Her free attack is not anything special, and if you're using a tactician for a free attack team, there are better ones out there, specifically Star-Lord and Captain Marvel. Experimental, I view as nearly vital to her. Her buffs are 100%, but her debuffs are 80. All of them, to my knowledge. I could go back and look through there and look, but pretty much all of them are 80%. And experimental is how you're going to bring those up, because buffs and debuffs are kind of the core of her character. You really want to make sure that those are at 100%. Experimental, fantastic set for her. I tend to try to make sure that I have it on at all times. For defensive sets, Veiled is not bad if you're waiting on your tank to get their first turn, or if you're using her in PvP, but she doesn't necessarily take full advantage of stealth. The 20% attack bonus is okay, but she's not a high attack or offensive character, so while it can increase the damage of that opening shot, the opening shot is often Pistolet or Brutal Ballet, which is not a high damage move. So it's not really going to take the full damage, it's not really going to make full benefit of Veiled, other than maybe as a survivability trick. I still use it on her when I'm using her in PvP, but in PvE it's secondary. Her okay health and her decent defense means that she will make reasonable use of Impenetrable compared to some other characters. Gamora, I didn't recommend it for her because she has a low health and low defense. Black Widow can actually make decent use of Impenetrable. Not as good as a tank will, but it's not bad for her. Barricading, always good. Rejuvenating, her health pool doesn't get so high that Rejuvenating can't refill her. It's especially good for taking her back above the 90% from Impenetrable. So give her the defensive sets of your choice. She can really make use of them pretty well. Her, in terms of secondary stats, focus on speed over attack because of her role in your party. Let's take a look at a couple of builds. Builds are interesting for her. A tactician is a major choice for your team. You pick your tactician based on what you want your team to do, and therefore what buffs you need to bring. If you're going to run a free attack team because Jump Kick is bugged and because she can't bring Frenzied, this is probably not the tactician for you. If your team is all offense already, if you're using Marvel Now Hawkeye and he's already bringing sharpshooting and focused and all the other stuff he needs to do high damage, her use of bringing offensive buffs is kind of redundant, and you'll kind of want a defensive tactician like Civil War Iron Man or MODOK. Age of Ultron Black Widow's greatest strength is when you have good, solid, tough characters with high damage moves but don't necessarily build up their own offense, or they don't build up the team's offense. The next character that I'm going to do here is Age of Ultron Thor. And I've already done characters like She-Hulk. These are relatively damage-focused characters who do have the ability to apply rampaging to themselves, but rampaging is pretty easily stripped off and needs to be reapplied. And wasting their turns, sources of your damage, in order to reapply it, limits their usefulness. Age of Ultron Black Widow is your backup for them to make them better. I use her alongside Moon Knight. Moon Knight's offensive buff of choice that he applies to himself is Confident. And he does apply Clobber to an enemy when he does his free attack. But other than that, he's primarily running around doing a bunch of melee attacks, and the ability to apply strength and rampaging to him can cause him to do really obscene levels of damage. She has become my tactician of choice, not just because she fit into that original team of mine, but also because of my tendency to swap characters around for these videos. The build that you see on her right now is designed for that. It's designed to give rampaging and fortified, or sorry, not rampaging and sharpshooting and strengthened, regardless of who I'm bringing, because I don't always know who I'm going to have on the team, and also because I put her in my leadership slot and I don't know who my allies' teams are. No matter no matter what heroes they are running, grabbing her as an ally means that they're going to have access to all of those core damage dealing buffs. When you're running a specifically ranged build, I recommend Pistolet. I do recommend Widow's Bite pretty much at all times because strengthen benefits everybody. Swap this one out if you're already capable of applying strengthen via a different character. And if you do, because, say, Marvel Now Thor, I believe, has the ability to do a team-wide strengthen buff. If you're going to run him with that, you can actually skip this and replace it with Eskrima Expertise as her primary source of damage. So the moves you pick are dependent on the buffs that the rest of your team brings, while using her to fill in all of the gaps. If you're running a melee team, your filler move of choice is probably System Shock once you get it up to 3-star, because you're able to weave it in repeatedly while you're waiting on enough stamina or her insight turn, so that you can use these two again. On a range team, your filler move is Explosive Disc, because at 4-star that drops to 25 stamina, kind of the same purpose. If your team is more specialized, if you're going to use Volatile, for instance, then this becomes useful even if you're maybe kind of focusing on melee otherwise. If your team can apply Strengthened, you can use this in place of Widow's Bite. Because of the bug, I would not use Jump Kick right now. It still applies off balance to one enemy, but doesn't apply it to all of them, and there are better free attack tacticians out there right now. In PvP, a fun little trick is to make use of Widow's Bite, Evac Support, and Eskrima Expertise, especially if somebody else can apply a tactical debuff. I'm probably going to take her into PvP alongside Winter Soldier with Explosive Discs, Eskrima Expertise, and Pistolet, because that applies all the buffs he needs and the blast effect he needs to kind of make the most out of his abilities. It's hard to come up with a specific build for Black Widow because, like most tacticians, she's there to bring the buffs, and if those buffs are duplicates on your team, you can swap out one of her abilities for a different one. She has a list. So, looking at the three here on the screen, these two are core for range build, for sharpshooting and strengthened. These two are core for melee, for rampaging and strengthened. But you can feel free to swap out that third slot to anything you like, as well as swapping out Widow's Bite to Eskrima Expertise if strengthen can be brought by the party. And there are heroes who do. Final thoughts on Black Widow. Kind of summed up there in the builds as well. She is a deliberate choice. All of them are. She brings offensive buffs, not defensive ones. If it's your defense that is lacking, if you have like a half tank who doesn't stack defense, who can maintain protect but doesn't necessarily stack the defensive side, you might want someone like MODOK. We saw that in the She-Hulk video. If you are running a free attack team, Captain Marvel and Star-Lord bring better buffs to that. If you're using your tactician for anything other than primarily increasing the damage of the rest of your characters, characters like Captain Marvel can actually run as a half tank on her own, and she can bring buffs to the team while maintaining her own protect, and is better off than paired with somebody who can either heal her or increase her defense. And Age of Ultron Black Widow doesn't pull that role. So tacticians have specific uses, and this tactician's use is offensive support for a variety of teams without specializing like others do. Build your dream team. Build your offensive characters first. Pick your tank. Pick your damage dealer to support your tank. And then pick your tactician to bring the buffs that team will need to fill the slots for it. If you are unsure of your team as a whole, if you're still pretty early in the game and you only have a limited selection of tacticians, Black Widow is a great all-around offensive build. She can help anybody, just not as well as others can help specific people. Now I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up here. I'm going to go ahead and start working on the... my goal for today is 2 other videos. Now that I have a halfway decent headset, I'd like to redo that Nebula video from scratch because it's just not up to par. The sound quality's terrible. I'm gonna work on the Age of Ultron Thor. His post is like 2/3 of the way done, so hopefully that won't take me too long. Over on the Reddit, I have posted a request list of here are the characters I have done with links to their individual posts. Here are the characters that I have listed as upcoming. I have moved certain characters like Marvel Now Hulk up the list, owing to the fact that 3 or 4 people have asked for him, like, collectively. Feel free to go over there, weigh in, give your opinion. There are some decent critiques on that post as well, specifically the fact that I keep using EISO, and I may still do it out of habit in place of just ISO. I'm not convinced that they're not going to change and add further ISO types further down the line, but until then, they're right. It is just ISO right now. Also, there's been some critique on the title of Pure Theory Crafting. Those very first posts, they weren't characters that I tested. They weren't characters. One of them was Nova, who nobody had at the time. So they were a theory crafting exercise because there was no practical data backup for it. It was me looking and designing and building without ever actually testing. So the name has kind of become a misnomer as we've gone through more and more characters that I've had the chance to build up to 30 and really kind of playtest. I'm not opposed to changing the name, but it's become something that people have recognized, and so I'm fully content to also keep it depending on what people say. Right now, it seems like more people recognize the name than would like me to change it. Until that time, go ahead, give some feedback over on the Reddit. I will put a post link at the bottom of this, like I always do. This is iHoagland. Until I'm back later with the Age of Ultron Thor video, I'm out.